On this episode of the Bronze Metalist podcast, we start Death Metal December with Possessed's Seven Churches.
Yeah.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Bronze Metalist podcast. I'm Kale.
I'm OJ.
We're two professional broadcasters. We like metal. We like to talk about it. And in this month of December,
Death metal.
we like to take we like to take some time to talk about a subject that is near and dear to our hearts. That is death metal.
I get weepy thinking about it.
Yeah, you know, it's I just think about the fact that it exists sometimes. And
not for my eyes, for my pustules.
your weeping pustules.
My weeping, but I think death metal. Oh, goo.
You've become a demon of Nurgle.
Yeah.
It's Death Metal December.
It is.
It's our tradition where for the month of December we talk about exclusively death metal albums.
We're starting with what is considered by many to be the first death metal album.
And I would agree with that. I think this is in retrospect a death metal album, though
it wasn't intended to be one.
Yes, because death metal didn't exist. If you would have said, "Hey, what about is this death metal?" and they're like, "Well, the song that's called Death."
Right.
I mean, are you talking about the song that's on the album?
Because that is death metal. It's called.
That's
death
the
metal.
name of the song. They would have probably said it was just a really heavy thrash metal album.
Right. That's what they're going for.
But that's how genres are born.
Exactly.
I miss Alex Trebek.
He was a treasure.
Alex Trebek was a treasure.
A treasure.
To quote Frank Welker. What about all this treasure? It's like, I don't know what school of voice acting and or just like broadcast, because that, I mean, I think that sort of first generation of like cartoon voice actors for Saturday morning cartoons and whatnot, you know, outside of Disney movies and that sort of thing.
Well, Frank Welker is just a delightful individual anyway.
But like that first generation of like Hanna-Barbera voice actors, a lot of them were like broadcasters.
Right.
You know, you've got on Scooby-Doo, you've got America's Top 40.
Oh, you're talking about
oh God,
like Casey Kasem. Thank you. Yeah.
Fucking broadcasters. I swear to God, we work at a radio station. Please don't take our radio broadcaster cards away.
And also don't make us talk into a death dedication.
Oh yeah. I love that clip. Casey Kasem just blowing his lid.
Yeah, completely losing his shit.
Because he gets so many like depressing letters.
Right.
And just like, I don't want to talk, go into this song, this fucking letter.
Where's the pictures I was supposed to see?
God. But I don't know what I don't know what accent Frank Welker has where that's the way he says treasure.
Yeah, you know, I don't know where he's from.
Treasure.
I think he's doing a character.
I don't know. I mean, I guess I've only seen that in the context of some Scooby-Doo clips, so sure. I don't know if there's other clips of him saying treasure from, you know, him doing voice work in other programs outside of his work as Fred on Scooby-Doo.
I just have to imagine that he said to the people, the engineers in there, he said, really? Blue ascot? He's going to say treasure weird.
I think it's red, isn't it?
Is it red ascot?
I think he's got like I think it's a white shirt, blue collar, red ascot.
You're right.
I think that's how it is.
Either way,
he's wearing an ascot.
He's wearing an ascot.
I mean, it was the 70s.
Well, 60s and 70s.
Late 60s. Into the 70s, so that wasn't deeply out of style.
No,
kind of disco-y, you know.
I mean, look at the van they're driving. Come on.
Yeah. Fred, now I'm just picturing Fred. You know, 19-year-old was really into disco, which that probably wouldn't have been weird at the time. because I think of disco being an older person thing, but that's because I'm 26.
Yeah.
Whereas I'm sure, a 19-year-old in the 70s very well may have liked disco.
Sure.
I don't know. It was a cool, hip thing that people in their 20s were doing while they were snorting coke and,
Yeah, well, cocaine was bigger in the 80s than the 70s. But it was there. It was definitely there.
Yeah. So I don't know. I don't know a ton about disco.
Disco's even kind of before my time. I mean, that kind of petered out in the mid to late 70s where there was a tremendous backlash. Everybody's like, this sucks.
Oh God, what was it? It was an episode of Drunk History where they were talking about the disco sucks thing or whatever that one radio station in Chicago did, and then they blew a massive hole in like a baseball field or something. It was supposed to be like they were gonna they had like a pile of disco records and they were gonna blow it up, and then the pyrotechnician used way too much explosives and they like blasted a crater into the baseball field. And I think this was in Chicago.
And he was like, oh, I'm sorry guys, but I gotta go. I got a whale.
I don't.
The big whale that they blew up with the dynamite.
Oh, yeah. That's I showed you that video, didn't I? Yeah. There's a famous like news clip from somewhere in I think it was in Oregon or something like that.
It was a beach.
Yeah, a beach somewhere where it wasn't a sperm whale. It was like some manner of whale washed up on the beach, and it was too heavy to move it with like equipment, and they didn't want to spend time like hacking it to pieces with chainsaws, so they figured, well, we're just gonna stuff it full of explosives and that will like vaporize the whale.
That won't go wrong at all.
There's nothing. Obviously, that'll be fine.
Smooth sailing from here.
And it seemed like there were people who should have known better.
Right.
That amount of explosives obviously would not vaporize a fucking whale. This isn't a nuclear weapon.
All this whale has to go somewhere.
Thankfully, no person got nailed with any particularly large chunk of whale.
At least one car.
One car got its roof caved in by a hunk of blubber and flesh. Okay, and this was sometime in the 70s. There's an old news clip of it
on YouTube.
You can find on YouTube if you just search exploding whale. 70s, that'll probably get you there, because there's other exploding whale videos. Those ones though are usually like
gas buildup.
Yeah, gas buildup in the internal organs of the whale.
What's up, Moorhead? We're exploding whale. Yeah.
I saw one video, I think it was somewhere in Southeast Asia, where they were like taking it off the beach. I don't know where they were taking the whale carcass, but it was on the trailer when it exploded and just dumped blood and guts all over this like this public area.
Ugh.
It was terrible, but very metal.
Very on topic.
It's incredibly metal.
There is death, and it is very metal.
I have been playing to switch topics. Something else that's pretty metal. I have been playing Warhammer 40K Darktide.
Sure.
Which is it's good. It's got some issues. It has some stability issues. It doesn't run particularly well on my computer.
Okay.
And a lot of people are more than a little dissatisfied with the way that the progression systems work. And I would kind of agree with that. But overall, as like a co-op shooter, it's pretty fun. I mean, it's a very similar vibe to their Vermintide games, which were Warhammer Fantasy.
Sure.
Except, instead of like a lot of the characters in Vermintide already have guns, but it's Renaissance era firearms.
Sure.
With the exception of the dwarf, where if you pick engineer, you can have a literal steam Gatling gun. Because dwarves in Warhammer Fantasy also have steampunk helicopters and shit. Like
you almost said Warhammer Fanny.
Warhammer Fanny, which means something infinitely worse depending upon what part of the English-speaking world you're from. like you've got, guns. You can get like or you can get bolters, which is the type of gun that Space Marines are depicted using most of the time, but it's a scaled down one that won't blow off a normal human's arm.
Sure.
From using it. It will absolutely blow people into bloody chunks because they are fully automatic rocket propelled grenade launchers is technically what they are.
Which, by the way, that has always screwed me up. When everybody says, we're trying this different RPG, I'm like, what are you doing?
Yeah, which one are you talking about?
Is there going to be dice involved?
Tabletop rocket-propelled grenades.
That would be awesome.
A pen and paper rocket-propelled grenade, which is just a drawing, I guess.
Sure, yeah. It's less dangerous.
Yeah, it's much less dangerous.
Yeah.
But it's a fun game. It is kind of odd because I'm playing this right after I've been playing a lot of Deep Rock Galactic, and on paper they have a lot of similarities in the sense that they're both like 4-player class-based co-op shooters where you are fighting against enemies that will show up in hordes that you have to mow down. But like the way that they work is really kind of different because Deep Rock Galactic also has sort of the mining element to it where like you're dwarves going into caves to get minerals.
Sure.
And there just happen to be a lot of bugs there that you need big guns to kill. Whereas Darktide, it feels a lot less cooperative for a cooperative game.
Right.
Like Deep Rock Galactic has a really, really good online community of like people who are usually pretty relaxed and positive and helpful. Whereas things feel kind of a bit more toxic and competitive with Darktide, where people are pursuing their own goals as they play instead of just kind of like, oh yeah, we're all on the mission together and we're helping each other out. And I think a big reason for that is like there's no mechanics in the game that really support teamwork in Darktide other than the fact that you have like a shield. It's not really a shield, but you have like a depicted on your HUD. I think it's called your toughness. And that's like an overshield before you lose permanent health. And the toughness regenerates if you stick together. If you are out by yourself and you lose all your toughness, it's not coming back. So you got to group up and stay together, and that will help your toughness regenerate. That's like the only thing in the game that like enforces the idea that you need to stay together and work together. Whereas Deep Rock Galactic, every single class has 2 dedicated support items that are designed to be helpful for the whole team. Some of them can only be used by you, but the effects that they produce are still useful. Like the scout has a grapple gun that only they can use, but it'll get them up to high places to like get to hard to reach minerals to mine. And hey, if it's the mineral that gives you ammo, that's really useful for everybody.
Sure.
Their other utility item is extremely useful. It's a flare gun that shoots flares that stick into the ceiling and last way longer than everybody else's flares and like light up whole rooms so it's not dark when the bugs come to kill you. That's insanely useful. And then you've got the engineer where they can set up auto turrets, obviously very useful. And then their other item is what's the engineer? What the hell is the engineer's others? Oh, a platform gun where they can shoot, up at the wall and it will make this little like foam platform that other dwarves can jump onto. That's very useful. Yeah, it's very useful. The gunner, despite being the guy who's lugging around a minigun everywhere he goes, actually is the closest thing the game has to a medic where they can toss down a bubble shield that will regenerate people's personal shields and like prevent bugs from walking into it. If there's any bugs standing there when you throw it down, they will back away. Like it's really good for rescuing people who are down, and they can also throw a zip line. They have a zip line gun, which is useful for everybody. And then Driller has drills for hands that can drill tunnels. Pretty useful. The other thing is a hunk of C4, which is often accidentally or intentionally used to murder your teammates because drillers tend to be psychopaths, but
Sure.
it is in theory useful for everybody because it also blasts away a lot of terrain in one go, which is useful for mining. Like there are all these items in the game that are useful for everybody, and you'll have people like.
And can you switch from which character you are, or?
Between missions?
Okay.
Not during the mission, but like, you'll have people like silently communicate with the laser pointer. You'll have the scout point at some minerals up at the wall, and then point at the engineer to be like, "Hey, can I get a platform underneath that?" They'll shoot a platform, and then the scout just zoop, grappling hooks up to it.
Oh, is this like an online multiplayer game?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
I don't know if it's on PlayStation. It might not be.
I always forget that's a thing.
Yes. Online multiplayer
games,
exists. Yes. It's incredibly popular.
Yeah, very popular.
You do it often with your son.
Well, yeah, okay, yeah. Yeah. He's the only person I do that with, though.
It's true.
I have 3 friends on PlayStation.
But
my 27-year-old, the 11-year-old, and the 11-year-old's weird friend.
But yeah, in Deep Rock Galactic, there's like all of these mechanics that reinforce the idea that you all have to work together. Whereas in Dark Tide, there's not really anything like that, and people will often accidentally get in the way and do frustrating things. There's a lot of frustration that I just haven't felt in this other game. And ultimately, they're 2 very different games that are doing different things. But it feels like there's a lot of there's not a ton of other games in this genre, because really like the genesis of the 4-player co-op shooter is like Left 4 Dead. Is like the first big, really popular one. And that was just literally, hey, you're 4 people, you have guns, and there's a lot of zombies. And you can find like med packs and stuff that you can give to other people, and so on and so forth. But it was very bare bones mechanics. It was basically just, there was a different studio that was making it originally before Valve took over. But once Valve got it started, it was basically just like, okay, here's Gary's mod, or here's Half-Life 2, but we put a modern skin over the top of it and gave the zombies destructible body parts, and that's it. Like there's not a lot of deep game mechanics in Left 4 Dead. But
it's just runny, shooty.
Yeah, and I feel like the sort of Vermintide and Darktide formula just sort of added on like classes and it's kind of like very light RPG mechanics, role-playing game mechanics.
Yeah, I gotcha.
On top of it, without really trying to more deeply develop the cooperative aspect of it, which is something that Deep Rock has really done. Like from the ground up, they're like, we want to make this a cooperative game where everybody contributes and can work together. And I like that feeling a little bit more. On the other hand, I also like chopping people in half with a chainsword. So that's pretty cool.
In video games. Right.
Because there's so many real chainswords out there.
Don't you have a chainsword?
No.
You want to buy one?
Do you have one?
I don't know.
There was a YouTube channel that made like a real chainsword, but it's it was the Man at Arms series. And one thing that always bothered me about that series is they'll make like really good looking like reproductions of video game weapons.
Sure.
But they always weigh 45 pounds.
Sure.
No matter what it is they're making, even if they're making something that ought to be more reasonable, it still ends up weighing 45 fucking pounds. I don't know how that like I think they made Kratos' axe at some point and it looked ludicrously heavy. And
I have that.
It shouldn't be all that heavy.
I want to get the Blades of Chaos too.
Yes. Blades of Chaos would be fucking heavy.
Would be a bit heavy, yeah. I think they manufacture the people who make them for consumer idiots like me want to hang them on the wall.
Yeah, they're wall hangers.
They're fine.
Yeah, when stuff that's made to be a wall hanger, it doesn't need to be reasonable and light
or heavy. Yeah.
I think another thing that happens there is like swords like that is when they're made to be wall hangers, they don't add distal taper, which is the sword getting narrower along the edge the closer you get to the tip. Yeah,
because you don't, if it's a decoration, for your home, you don't necessarily want it to be a razor-sharp weapon of war.
You don't need it to cut well.
Right.
And like distal tapers are good for cutting, but also good for just making the thing usable and not extremely heavy.
Right.
It's an important part of making a sword that some people don't understand.
Right.
Because you just see a sword in profile.
Sure.
And you don't understand how narrow they get.
Right. It's got to cut.
Yeah. It's got to chop true stuff.
Your sword has to be useful.
Your sword.
Sword.
But yeah, I've been playing that. Also, speaking of like swords and stuff, yesterday they added an update to a game called Valheim that I'm sure I've talked about on here before, but it was a while back.
Right.
When that game first came out, and me and some of my online friends were playing that obsessively while we were both working from home.
Right.
And that game was just kind of like my whole life for a while during that work from home period. But they added like the first really big update where they added a whole new area with a new boss and everything. And so me and a lot of those same people have a server that we made together and are now, starting over. Yeah, that's been fun. I've kind of given myself the role of the carpenter.
Okay.
I'm responsible for. I've made myself responsible for sort of building all the bases, which is, I guess, mildly boring because I'm not going out and fighting monsters or anything. But I also like having things look nice and making things relative. It's weird. I'm way more organized in that video game than I am in real life.
Sure.
Which is odd. Like I made a whole wall of chests. The chests have signs where it's like, this goes in here. If I see people putting shit in the wrong chests, I'm gonna freak out. Yeah, I'm happy to be playing that game again. It's got a really relaxing soundtrack of just like clarinet.
That reminds me, there's a game that I started to play like years ago that I had to quit because my living situation changed, and I left that game in the console there.
Yes,
and it's like $10, and I want to buy it again. And it is one of the most relaxing games.
Tis it
ever? Yeah.
What is it?
It's Stardew.
Oh yeah, Stardew Valley.
Yeah,
I have been avoiding buying that game for a very long time because I'm pretty sure that if I downloaded it, it would destroy my life.
It might. I mean,
it's like a much cuter RimWorld, basically. Sure. Like when I first downloaded RimWorld a few summers ago, I had a problem with that game for a while.
Right.
And then RimWorld is really weird because I bought it, I played it for like 2 months straight and played nothing else and just played it for like 5 hours a day. And then I stopped playing it and I have not touched it since.
So Stardew is closer to Animal Crossing than it is to RimWorld.
But still, it scratches that exact same itch.
Right. Sort of an OCD kind of, gotta do this now, gotta do this. Oh, time to do this.
Yeah, and Valheim is not much different. But there's big Viking monsters to fight. And also there is an end to Valheim, and that's whenever we go and beat this next boss that has been added. It's just all the work we got to do to get up to there. Who knows how long it will take us, but there is at the very least a goal. There's an end to it.
Right.
And it won't be what happened with RimWorld, which is me kind of going further and further and further and then just kind of going like, yeah, I'm just kind of done. I'm just done with this. And I had no real desire to play it on like harder difficulties or do other stuff.
It had eaten your life so much that you were ready to move on.
I built the escape ship. The goal in RimWorld is you're supposed to build an escape spaceship.
Okay.
To get your people off of this shitty planet.
So it's kind of like Subnautica in a way.
Yeah, it's kind of like that, which also the same thing happened to me in Subnautica, where in the first Subnautica, I built the escape vessel and then never launched it.
You never launched it?
I never actually finished the first Subnautica game.
You were like a click away. You were like,
I didn't want to finish it. Why not just fucking stay there? I would be fine staying there. I got a cute little cuttlefish.
Sure.
And what's my cuttlefish gonna do without me? I can't leave my cuttlefish behind. Yeah, I don't know. I just didn't see any real reason to finish the game.
All right.
It didn't really appeal. I solved the problem of the virus, the disease that was making all the fish sick, and also the player character.
Right.
I fixed the disease.
You built the ship.
I built the escape rocket, and then just didn't launch it because why? I don't want to leave this watery paradise, even if there are big monsters that want to eat me.
Right. It has kind of a bad ending anyway.
Yeah. Because when you launch the escape ship, you find out you owe the company you work for like $3 billion.
Right.
For all the shit that you built while you were on the ocean world. Yeah, I just didn't feel like finishing that, I'm just going to stay here with my cute little fish. And that's odd for a game that takes place in a setting that I do have a fairly strong phobia of.
Deep water.
But I had become so familiar with the mechanics of the game that I was like almost any scary game to me, about 10 hours in, it's not scary anymore.
Sure.
Once I know what the deal is, it doesn't really bother me anymore. Like Dead Space kind of gets to be that way where like the first couple hours, it's like, oh, this is really tense and really scary. And then after a while, it just kind of gets to be like, oh, hey, another room. All right, there's the vents, there's the vents, there's the vents. There's something that's going to pop out there. All right, I got my gun and I'm good to go. You get inoculated to that sort of stress. And that happened in Subnautica.
I tell you, I saw a movie yesterday.
What did you watch?
Violent Night.
Is it Violent Night, Deadly Night?
It's just Violent Night.
Oh, is that a new one?
That's a new one. Yeah.
Is that technically a remake of Violent Night, Deadly Night?
That's Silent Night, Deadly
Silent Night, Deadly Night. I don't know what the first one is about, but I know the second one is the movie with the guy that goes, Garbage Day! But how was Violent Night?
Violent Night was actually good. I really enjoyed it. It was campy and silly and sentimental and very, very gory. Right. I was there with an 11-year-old boy, and it was funny. It was very funny. We laughed a lot.
It's good.
I mean, it was a movie that knew what it was the whole time. It was never confused by this is high art. No, this is Santa Claus. Santa Claus foils an in-home invasion that's led by John Leguizamo. So I mean,
this is this. I'm trying to think of like the home invasion movies.
This movie is kind of Home Alone.
Yeah.
Mixed with what the fuck else? I mean,
I was gonna say like Assault on Precinct, whatever the fuck the number is. I can't remember.
No, I've heard people say, and this is accurate. It's Home Alone mixed with Die Hard.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Those are good descriptors. I watched some clips from Home Alone today.
Yeah.
Kind of apropos of nothing. I can't remember.
Have you never seen it before?
No, I've seen Home Alone. But I specifically wanted to see the clip of what's the kid in Home Alone?
Talking about Macaulay Culkin.
What's the kid's name though?
What is his name?
Kevin
McAllister.
Yeah. The clips of Kevin talking to old man Marley in the church.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know what it is. That old man makes me very sad. That I tear up watching Home Alone Just when the old man's talking about his relationship with his son and how they haven't talked in a long time. And then at the end of the movie, when they show up at his house and Kevin's watching from the window and he waves and he's hugging his granddaughter. That shit tears me up so much. Like,
especially knowing that old man is dead now.
I mean, he was old at the time and it was
30 years ago. It
was the early 90s.
Was it 1990?
Something like that. I don't know. But in what is otherwise a very funny movie, just an incredibly genuine, very sort of heartfelt little subplot about the old man. He's just a very, he's terrified of him, and he's just a very nice old man who happens to look kind of intimidating and is often carrying a shovel. And also, he's carrying a shovel around because he's doing a public service. Right.
Yeah, he's helping people out.
He's shoveling salt onto the sidewalks in the wintertime. Yeah. He's providing a useful service to people. But when you're a kid, that doesn't matter. You don't about that stuff.
Creepy old man with shovel is just.
It's like that could just be your grandpa. But do you want to talk about, speaking of grandpas, do you want to talk about Possessed?
Sure.
A bunch of old guys. So Possessed is an American death metal band.
From the Bay Area.
And they are considered by some to be the first death metal band. And it is kind of it's kind of a toss-up. It sort of becomes semantics, and it's very sort of subjective on what is and is not the first death metal band.
Right. I think I kind of agree with what you said earlier. Like the band Death might be the first death metal band, whereas this one might be seen retroactively as the first death metal album.
Yeah, that's where I've kind of landed on it. Is like, Possessed was not a death metal band, and they didn't write this as to be a death metal album.
No, they just wanted it to be heavy and fast and loud.
Yeah, death metal didn't exist at the time. Right. They just were writing a heavy, chaotic, sort of foreboding thrash metal album that people heard and kind of latched on to the sound of.
Right.
You have, Death at the very least. And we were, talking before we started recording about how, Death may not have necessarily been founded quite exactly as a death metal band, because there was a Death before Chuck Schuldiner.
Right. They were a hardcore punk band.
Yeah, that was a band before Chuck Schuldiner joined, and then
it was a different band.
Chuck Schuldiner joined, and I think a day after he joined, everybody else left the band or some shit, and he's like, "Well, my band now," and then. It became Death as we know it, the first death metal band, and I think it's fair to call Scream Bloody Gore the first really proper death metal album, in the sense that this was written to be what it is.
Right, in 1987 is when that came out.
This came out in 85. And it was written to be a very heavy thrash metal album, and if you kind of compare and contrast this and Scream Bloody Gore, I think it's relatively apparent, sort of the stylistic differences and the differences in songwriting a little bit. This sounds more like a thrash metal album that's been maybe tuned down a little bit,
right?
Versus Death, which sounds more what we would consider to be more of a death metal sound. But this is the prototype. This is the prototype.
That's what I love about music and genre, because
it's fluid.
It's fluid. Yeah, it's a great
fluid.
You never know what started really when.
Exactly.
I mean, everything stands on the shoulders of everything that came before it.
Unless you are the sort of hipster that starts a band and makes up a genre for the band. Yeah. Then you can say that you started that. I mean, it is still obviously going to be influenced by, unless it's truly insane.
Right.
Like a string of words no one has ever put together before.
What the hell was this band? I had one of their albums. They were a Balkan flavored accordion punk band.
Yeah, I don't know if that is a sentence anyone has spoken before.
I'm pretty sure they did, because the album I had, all it was their sort of Balkan flavored accordion punk versions of the soundtrack to The Sound of Music. The hell are they called? The Off Tones or something like that?
That's feel like that's an appropriate name.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, if you're setting out to do something completely new and different, then I guess you can, in retrospect, people can say, well, obviously they were the originators of this because they made up the name and said we're this.
Yeah,
but that's usually not how it happens, at least for like big actual genres with
big genre.
big genres with hundreds of bands.
Right. So like, who knows who was the real first thrash metal band? A lot of people will say it was really sort of a sound that was birthed by Motorhead.
But who knows?
But yeah, really.
Because like, when you think about like what makes thrash metal, if you look that up, people will talk about, oh, well, it's a fusion of heavy metal and hardcore punk. And that's what fucking Motorhead is.
Sure.
But when you listen to Motorhead and you listen to Metallica,
it's different
they
stuff.
sound pretty different from each other. Motorhead is, at least in my experience, a bit kind of bouncy. Is sort of a
very, very rock and roll. I mean,
you can imagine, very, very rock and roll. You can imagine being in a biker bar,
absolutely,
and slamming down some beers. Not that people weren't doing that to Metallica, but
they do it now.
Yeah,
to both.
To Metallica and to Motorhead. At some point, it would be fun to go to the Rainbow. I'm pretty sure they have a bronze statue of Lemmy in his booth.
I'm pretty sure they do
at the Rainbow,
in Hollywood. There,
yeah. Go to the Rainbow Bar and Grill,
Rainbow Room, yeah,
or the Rainbow Room, or whatever it is. Yeah, his favorite place, Lemmy's favorite place.
Right.
Go to Saint Vitus at some point too, or Vitus.
Saint Vitus, yeah.
Vitus. It's very famous metal venue and bar.
There's a band that took the name from that.
Yes.
Yeah.
Did the venue come first?
I think that the venue came first. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. It's like one of those metal like pilgrimage spots. I have to imagine, the same way that fucking Helvet is in Norway. For better or for worse,
for black metal people?
Yeah, when it comes to mayhem related stuff. But let's get back to Possessed. So were you back in the day a Possessed fan? I mean, I know death metal is something that you didn't really get into until a little bit
90s.
later.
Yeah.
I feel like that's the story with a lot of people.
Yeah.
Didn't really get into death metal until the 90s, because that's really when it took off.
Right. 1990, I think, is when, somebody said, hey, check out the new Napalm Death album. What's this?
What is that? Holy fuck.
Can you make that louder, please? And so,
Who is this Barney fellow?
I really didn't get into these guys. Released into this album until later, like maybe late 90s, early
until
2000s.
They had been broken up for a while.
Exactly. Until somebody said, listen to this. And then it was funny. One of the reasons here's one of the reasons I think I knew about it was from an episode of Oprah.
Really?
Yeah.
I think I know what you're talking about. Continue.
Yeah. And it was, I think she was talking to Primus.
Sure.
Oh, no. She was talking about death metal, and the guys from Primus were watching Oprah together. That's what it was.
Okay.
And then Larry was like, that's my old band. like, what? Yeah, I played lead guitar on that album.
Oh, jeez.
Yeah, and so I'm like, I gotta check this out.
I think we mentioned that, that the band broke up, and something that we touched on before we started recording is I think that is part of what has sort of colored the difference between Death and Possessed in retrospect when you talk about early death metal bands and who came first and who was the first to do this. Is sort of like Death stuck around into the heyday of death metal, into the original rise of death metal throughout the 90s. Death was around, until the last Sound of Perseverance came out in what, 98, 97?
Was it? I thought their last album came out in 2000, but maybe I'm wrong about that.
That might have been a Control Denied album.
Might have been Control Denied, yeah.
But like Death stuck around and continued to be a big presence in the genre. We started and we can't stop. But like they continued to stick around, whereas Possessed broke up, and they didn't do a ton of reunion shows until they properly got back together to start making music together again. And there is sort of an interesting story, because after the band sort of broke up, the lead singer Jeff Becerra got mugged at gunpoint and was shot and has been paralyzed from the chest down ever since then. So if you go and see Possessed these days, he's performing in a wheelchair.
But they did give him it's really cool. This was actually it
was like an exoskeleton thing, wasn't it?
Yeah, they gave him fucking robot legs.
Yeah, I saw that.
Yeah, so the singer from Possessed now has robot legs.
Yes. Tested them out, which is like, I mean, we were talking about Cyberpunk last week, and like we're kind of getting there. We're getting there. But
he needs the sword embedded in his arm, and
he needs some mantis blades or a cannon in there or something like that, and then we're all good to go. We're ready to rock. But that I'm sure that maybe made the idea of reunion tours perhaps a little bit more difficult at the time. But like they had, there was reunions in 2007, but it wasn't necessarily like the whole original lineup. That was just kind of Jeff performing, using the name performing
Possessed
at Wacken Open Air in Germany.
I feel like when you have one member of the band who's who's paralyzed from the chest down, I feel like that's going to bring you somewhat closer to other members of the band, because you have to realize that there are certain things you wouldn't totally be able to do for yourself.
Yes.
And you're going to need some aid.
Just a little bit of help, yeah.
Right.
But they have been, they got sort of back together properly in 2017. They signed a 3-album recording contract with Nuclear Blast.
Nice.
So
you know what it'll sound like.
Yeah. I mean, the whole thing about like Nuclear Blast's production, I feel like really kind of only applies to sort of lesser known bands.
Sure.
I think like
people with no established sound.
I think the bigger your name is and the more money that you as a band have to put into the production, you can sort of change up the way that it sounds. They have a reputation for a lot of their bands having highly digital production that leaves them sounding a bit processed, and a bit too clean. But they had a new album that came out called Revelations of Oblivion that came out in 2019, and that was their third album.
Right, their third album in 37 years.
Yeah, and they've got another one in the works, according to an interview that Jeff did February of last year. They're working on another one, and they've been touring and doing all kinds of stuff sort of in as the COVID era, because like that must have fucking sucked, like getting back together, putting out a new album in 2019. All right, Possessed is back. Fuck,
nothing can stop us now.
Fuck. Like, God damn, that would suck so much, especially if you're like really excited to get back to it.
Dude, this is our first album in 25 years. I can't believe we're doing it. Yeah.
We're going to go on a huge tour. We're back. Oh, shit. But let's talk about the actual fucking album. Does this album slap?
Yeah, it definitely slaps.
Yeah, it does.
Yeah.
It's what do you want? What do you want? What do you want? What do you want from us? Yes, it slaps. It's a death metal album. Although this is a very thrashy death metal album.
Yeah.
But I think it's appropriate enough to call it a death metal album in retrospect. I didn't do a ton of research because you also showed up early before I got started.
I'm sorry.
On it. You're fine.
I stopped to the drive-thru and didn't know how quick it was going to be.
It's McDonald's. It's always quick.
Sure.
If you would have gone to Sonic, on the other hand,
I'd have been
you'd have been
here
10,
right now.
Yeah, you'd have been 10 minutes late. But didn't really bother looking up scores. Who gives a shit? It's Death Metal December.
Yeah.
We're here to talk about the shit that we love. Kat wants attention. Speaking of shit that I love.
Because you love that little shit.
I love that little shit. It makes me angry sometimes. She tried to scratch the back of my chair before we started recording.
From the scratching post.
She was sitting on a thing made of carpet. She has a little platform that's made of carpet, designed for her to be able to scratch it at her convenience. But no, my nice leather computer chair, she's like, gotta get my claws up on that. What's your favorite song on this album?
I think, I really love the last track. I love the song Death Metal.
Yeah, it's just, it's death metal.
It is. It's death metal. But the song, for some reason, that always tickles me when I hear it is Burning in Hell.
Burning in Hell. I'm trying to remember that one.
Well, it's it's a song with my favorite drum fill in it. That's in probably, 300-400 heavy metal songs over the last 50 years. It's the I'm gonna hit every tom now. It does that twice in there. It's like, yeah.
It's the drum version of the there's a riff from I can't remember what death song it's from, but it's on Sound of Perseverance. People of a certain age will call it instead the it's from Avenged Sevenfold's second album.
Okay.
I can't remember the name of the song at the moment, but it goes. And there, like, that progression has been used so many fucking times. It's like all over like 2000s like metalcore and alternative metal.
Sure.
And someone at some point made a list of like every song that has used that sort of riff. What I noted as being my favorite was Holy Hell.
Oh, yeah.
Because while I was listening to it, I was like, this is the one. More than the song that's called death metal.
Sure.
To me, Holy Hell was the one that stuck out the most as like, this one right here is the death metal song.
I can hear that.
To me, that one is the one that sounded most like what would become death metal itself. I also want to say of the vocals on this album, like the vocals absolutely are, of the time, definitely. If you compare these vocals and, any of Chuck Schuldiner vocals,
right,
they're, very, very similar to each other. And you wouldn't get the really deep sort of guttural growls until you have like Cannibal Corpse and stuff.
Right.
Whether it is Chris Barnes or George Fisher or whomever, or like Frank Sinatra. No, Frank
Caliente.
I can't remember his last name, but from Suffocation.
Welker. Okay. Yeah.
His vocals, being I think even more than like Corpse Grinder and Chris Barnes, the really deep sort of guttural sort of vocals that people often associate with death metal in general. But I kind of find a lot of the death metal bands that I like that sound a bit more traditional don't go quite that deep and guttural all the time.
Sure. They switch it up.
Yeah. And there are some bands that are always sort of that deep and incomprehensible. I mean, I feel like that kind of characterizes a lot of the Barnes era of Cannibal Corpse.
Sure.
When people make the fucking Cookie Monster jokes.
Yeah.
When they make those jokes about Cannibal Corpse, I feel like they're usually talking about Chris Barnes, because most of Corpse Grinder's vocals are relatively comprehensible.
Yeah,
you can tell he's saying words at the very least.
Right.
If you don't necessarily understand what they are.
But you can tell the words. He's pronouncing something.
Yeah, he's making an effort to enunciate, whereas Barnes was just kind of...
That's why if you play a Cannibal Corpse song in a bar,
it has to be the live version of I Come Blood.
Yeah, of course. Because they might not otherwise understand
what the song is about.
Exactly. And he explains that at the get-go.
This is a song about shooting blood from your cock. So much fun. But God damn it. But yeah, I think like the vocals very much like more than anything, it's like, oh yeah, that's those, you can just lift those out of this and put them on any other death metal album from the 80s and they would not sound out of place. Whereas maybe the songwriting can be argued, is still thrashier than everything else that will come after. The vocals are very at home. And probably would have been, pretty extreme by the standards of 1987 compared to other thrash metal bands.
Sure.
There was a lot of bands at the time and bands that you have had me listen to that were already experimenting with doing, harsher and grittier and rougher vocals as bands were sort of upping the ante throughout the 80s.
Right, it was an arms race.
Yeah. And like that's just kind of been the story of metal from the beginning, is it's just kind of been a continuous arms race of people going for heavier and crazier and more complicated. And
if you want to think about it, I mean, like 45, 46 years ago, people were talking about them very heavy music, devil worshiping Blue Oyster Cult.
Yes.
That heavy metal music.
Or you listen to we listened to the album Black Sabbath, and that's, the first half of a lot of songs is kind of spooky and heavy. Sure. And then the last half is like, oh, it's boogie time. Right. let's party.
Right. Which at some point we should listen to Paranoid.
Yeah, we absolutely should listen to Paranoid.
Arguably the better album. But that's sort of
I would believe that. Yeah. I don't know if I've listened to Paranoid all the way through. I probably have. There was a period where I was getting myself into the Dio period for a little bit.
We should definitely do that at some point.
Yeah, we should talk about. I've listened to Heaven and Hell all the way through several times.
Right.
I genuinely really like Heaven and Hell. Like there's a lot of older metal albums and bands that I will pay lip service to the idea of liking it in the sense of like, oh, I listened to it. Yeah, I enjoyed it, but it's never going to be something that I go back and listen to. But every once in a while, I'm like, let's listen to Heaven and Hell. Let's have some fun.
Or just like a Dio album.
Yeah, or just I think that same week when I was doing that, it was like, all right, now let's listen to some Dio. Look out. That starts on his Black Sabbath stuff.
Right.
I'm sure there's probably a Rainbow song or an Elf song that he.
There's no doubt
that he shouts "Look out" on.
Yeah.
There's got to be one at the very least, but
I feel like there's a story where there was a guitar cabinet that was going to fall on one of the other band members. And
while they were recording.
Yeah, and he saved their life.
Look out!
But yelling, "Look out!" He's like, That's my lucky charm now.
I got to say that in every other song from now on.
And that big Elf album actually was fantastic as well.
Yeah, should listen.
Yeah,
everybody needs more Ronnie James Dio in their life.
Everybody does. I do love that Lookout YouTube.
Yeah, the compilation of him yelling "Look out."
Him yelling "Look out," but like every fourth picture is Rhea Perlman.
That's right. I forgot.
Right.
Because he did look remarkably like Rhea Perlman.
Yeah.
But we've gotten so off topic.
Yeah.
But Seven Churches is a great album.
It is.
And I think it definitely deserves the title of being the first death metal album. With the caveat that like they didn't write it intending it to be the first death metal album.
Right.
But I think it is nonetheless. I don't think that, makes Scream Bloody Gore any less revolutionary.
Right.
For what it was. And obviously we will still be celebrating Chuckmas in a couple of weeks. We're not suddenly switching teams and saying, that death is terrible. And that I don't think anyone would think that anyway, but there's a short snippet on the Wikipedia page for Possessed talking about Chuck Schuldiner having listened to this album and going like, holy shit, this is really different and really new.
And it influenced him.
Yes.
And I think they influenced each other to some extent.
Yeah, I would imagine so. Because that was this came out at the time when Chuck was still living in the Bay Area. Scream Bloody Gore didn't come out until they had relocated to Florida.
Right.
But at the time he was in the Bay Area. And then, that's the genesis of the Florida death metal scene.
Sure.
Which is just feels like a weird place to have a music scene in Florida, but
actually there's
where it be.
There's a number of music scenes based out of Florida that there's a Southern rock. There's a Florida Southern rock scene.
I mean, that doesn't surprise me.
No,
though.
That makes sense.
I guess it's not any weirder than Midwestern emo.
That's a thing.
Which has an extremely distinctive style that I enjoy quite a lot. I'm kind of weird. People of my generation, when they talk about emo bands that they like, they're talking about Panic at the Disco and stuff like that. I don't care for that generation of music. I'm an incorrigible hipster who likes Midwestern emo from the late 90s. Sure.
Where they sing very extremely heartfelt, somewhat depressing music and throw a "Don't You Know" in there every now and then.
This music is so Midwestern. It stood in the doorway for 45 minutes trying to say goodbye.
This
emo is so Midwestern. It made me a tater tot hot dish.
It brought 4 kinds of noodle salad.
Everything's just mildly passive aggressive.
Yeah. Oh boy.
This album is so Midwestern it went home and screamed at the wall and punched it instead of just, talking about its feelings. Oh, we are an unhealthy people.
Oh, we are.
We are a emotionally unhealthy people here in the Midwest.
We are. I mean, but what's funnier is I've noticed that the people to the north of us are worse.
In Canada?
Yeah. I mean, they're so friendly, but they're so friendly because we're just going to bottle up all that stuff.
Bottling it all up.
Yeah.
I think because people forget that the Midwest does extend into Canada.
Right, yeah.
It does get up in there.
Right, Saskatchewan and Manitoba are Midwestern provinces.
Yeah. I feel like maybe a little less on the Saskatchewan, but definitely fucking Winnipeg.
Oh, yeah.
Winnipeg's as Midwestern a city as it gets.
Right. What's funny? You look at the size of Manitoba, a majority of the human beings in that large space
live in
Winnipeg, right.
Winnipeg also takes up a remarkable amount of space just on the map, the slice of Manitoba.
It does.
The actual footprint in the state is actually quite a large amount of territory.
I saw the Pope in Winnipeg.
Oh, yeah. You told me about
back
this
in
before.
84.
There's the Pope.
Yeah. Well, my mom and dad are like, hey, we're going to Canada. I'm like, oh, cool. Why? We're going to see the Pope in Canada.
Why are you going to Canada to see the Pope?
I guess it was his closest appearance.
Yeah. Which Pope was that?
John Paul II.
Okay.
I
forget he was Pope for fucking ever.
He was. I got a commemorative poster.
A popester.
A popester. Which is actually just an app for downloading papal music.
It's illegal, though.
Yeah. It's not licensed.
Don't let Lars Ulrich know. All right.
We gotta
wrap this up. Next week, I actually I know it's Death Metal December, and I should know better, and have something ready to go. But I have not made up my mind. just yet. So we'll surprise you.
Yay, with death metal.
Yeah, with something that is death metal. There's a couple things I'm kind of considering, but I hadn't taken time to think about it super deeply. So,
Can't wait to find out.
I will find something, and it will be fun to listen to. I'm sure. I don't know why I said that like it's not gonna be.
Does somebody need a nap?
I need a nap. I want to have some hot chocolate.
No cocoa.
I want hot cocoa.
No marshmallows in my cocoa.
The other night, I got done eating. It was like 20 minutes after I was done eating. I was like, fuck, I really need sugar. And so I just went to Target and bought
a bag of sugar.
No, I bought two. I bought 2 packets of instant cocoa mix, a thing of Fairlife milk, and a can of Ready Whip.
You were set.
I went into the self checkout was full, so I went into one of the regular checkouts. Like, did you find everything? I was like, yep. I was on a mission, and it was successful.
Thank you, man.
I will be going now. And I burned my tongue pretty severely, but it was worth it. Are you one of the, I was about to phrase it. I don't mean this, but are you one of those psychopaths that prefers water when they make hot cocoa?
It depends on the packet. It depends on if it has enough of the milk powder in it. Then why not?
Yeah, to me, it just doesn't matter. I don't care for it with water. It's gotta be milk.
See, my problem is that sometimes if you're heating up milk where it's hot enough to make the cocoa the right temperature,
there's like a gross film.
Yeah, there's a gross film and an odd smell.
I know that bugs me, but the end result to me is
it's creamier.
It's creamier. It's rich. It's so good. It's so good.
It's so good.
All right, let's be done with this. Thanks for listening to this episode of the Bronze Metalist Podcast. Go ahead and subscribe to us in whatever it is you're using to listen to this podcast, or check us out somewhere else. Libsyn's podcast source or your Apple Podcast.
Stalk us
app.
online.
No. Go ahead and follow our social media pages if you want. We have a Facebook page. We have a Twitter page.
Steal our identity.
Yep. Go ahead and do that.
Sure.
It's not worth a lot, but
no, it would. In fact, it would be probably a detriment to your credit record.
Yeah. Do you want to take on my student debt? Thanks for listening to the Bronze Medalist Podcast. I'm Kale.
I'm OJ.
Congratulations.